Document. Part 2. The massive structure loomed ahead, growing larger with each passing moment as the Aurora approached cautiously. Rachel Dawson sat at the helm, her eyes fixed on the view screen, unable to look away from the strange object that had appeared in their path. It was both beautiful and unsettling. Its surface shimmered faintly, like oil on water, while glowing patterns shifted across it in intricate designs. The structure seemed alive, pulsating gently, as though it were breathing. Stephen Carter stood beside her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw was clenched, and his brow furrowed deeply. He didn't trust this thing, not one bit. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low but laced with tension. "We don't know what it is or what it wants." Rachel glanced at him briefly before returning her focus to the controls. "I'm not sure of anything," she admitted, "but we have no choice. This signal, it's artificial. Someone made this, or something did." Stephen let out a frustrated breath. "And what if it's hostile? What if we're walking right into a trap?" She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the navigation panel. She knew he wasn't wrong. They had no way of knowing whether the structure posed a threat, but staying put meant certain death, and turning back would only lead them deeper into the void. Their options were limited. "If we don't investigate," she said finally, "we'll never find out why we're here. And we'll never get home." Stephen didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared through the window at the alien construct, his mind racing with possibilities, all of them bad. He wanted to argue, to convince Rachel to turn the ship around, but deep down, he knew she was right. They couldn't stay adrift forever. If there was even the slightest chance this thing could help them escape the void, they had to take it. "Fine," he muttered after a long pause. "But we do this carefully. No rushing and blind." Rachel nodded in agreement. "Of course. We'll send a drone first. Gather as much information as possible before we commit to anything." Together, they worked quickly to prepare the probe, a small, boxy device equipped with cameras, sensors, and basic communication tools. Once everything was ready, Stephen launched the drone, watching as it drifted silently toward the structure. On the monitor, they tracked its progress, holding their breath as it drew closer. As the drone neared the alien construct, the glowing patterns on its surface began to shift more rapidly, almost as if reacting to its presence. Rachel leaned forward, her heart pounding as she studied the footage streaming back to the Aurora. The structure's design defied logic. It looked neither fully mechanical nor entirely organic. Parts of it seemed to ripple like liquid metal, while others remained rigid and angular. It was as though it existed somewhere between technology and biology. The drone moved along the surface, capturing detailed images of the glowing patterns. Some areas resembled symbols, though they bore no resemblance to any language Rachel had ever seen. Others formed complex geometric shapes that pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically. She felt a strange pull, an inexplicable urge to touch the screen, as if the patterns themselves were calling to her. Then, without warning, the camera feed flickered. Static filled the screen for a brief moment before clearing again. When the image stabilized, something new appeared. Movement. Shadows darted across the frame, too fast for the drone's sensors to capture clearly. Whatever they weren't part of the structure itself. They were separate, living entities. "What the hell was that?" Stephen exclaimed, leaning closer to the monitor. His voice was sharp, tinged with alarm. "I don't know," Rachel replied, her tone hushed. Her hands hovered anxiously over the controls, ready to recall the drone at the first sign of danger. But the shadows vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind only the eerie stillness of the construct. Before they could decide what to do next, the feed cut out completely. The screen went black, and all data transmission ceased. Rachel tapped frantically at the controls, trying to re-establish contact, but it was no use. The drone was gone. "Well, that's just great," Stephen muttered sarcastically. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. Now what? Send another one? Or should we just waltz right in ourselves? Rachel ignored his sarcasm, her mind already working through the implications of what they'd seen. Those shadows, they weren't part of the structure. They were beings. Intelligent ones, maybe. You think they took the drone? Stephen asked skeptically. It's possible, she said. Or maybe they disabled it because they saw it as a threat. He raised an eyebrow. So now we're dealing with paranoid aliens who might shoot first and ask questions later. Fantastic. Despite his attempt at humor, the tension in the room was palpable. Both of them knew they were treading dangerous ground. Yet, despite the risks, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were close to something important, something monumental. We need to keep going, she said firmly. Whatever's inside that thing, it's not random. This isn't some abandoned relic floating in space. It's active, alive. Stephen sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. You realize how insane this sounds, right? Walking up to an alien spaceship or whatever this is and knocking on the door. We don't even know if they're friendly. And sitting here waiting to die is better. Rachel shot back. Her voice rose slightly, betraying her frustration. Look, I get it. This is risky. But we've been stuck in this void for 2 years. 2 years, Stephen. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life drifting aimlessly until we run out of air? Because that's where we're headed if we don't try something. Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He knew she was right. As much as he hated to admit it, staying put wasn't an option anymore. If they wanted to survive, they had to take a chance if it meant stepping into the unknown. All right, he said reluctantly. But we go in prepared. No, stupid. Heroics. If things go south, we bail. Agreed, Rachel said, nodding. Relief washed over her face, though she tried to hide it. She didn't want to show weakness, not when they were about to make such a critical decision. They spent the next hour gathering supplies and suiting up in protective gear. The suits were old and patched together from spare parts, but they would provide some level of protection if things turned hostile. Rachel also brought along a handheld scanner and a small robotic assistant named Rover, which could analyze environmental conditions and collect samples. When everything was ready, they maneuvered the Aurora closer to the structure, docking near a wide opening that seemed to serve as an entrance. The airlock hissed as it depressurized, and then the outer door slid open with a groan. Beyond it lay darkness, the interior of the alien construct. Rachel stepped forward first, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. Stephen followed close behind, clutching a makeshift weapon, a length of pipe he'd salvaged from the ship's storage bay. The corridor stretched ahead of them, dimly lit by the same bioluminescent patterns that adorned the exterior. The walls pulsed faintly, casting an otherworldly glow that danced across their helmets. This place gives me the creeps, Stephen muttered under his breath. His voice crackled slightly through the comm system built into their suits. Try to stay focused, Rachel replied. Her tone was calm, though her grip on the scanner tightened nervously. She activated Rover, setting it to scan the immediate area for signs of life or hazardous conditions. As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost oppressive. It wasn't just the lack of light or the eerie silence, it was something else, something intangible. Rachel felt it pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She glanced at Stephen, who looked equally unsettled. Do you feel that? She asked quietly. He nodded. Yeah, feels like dread. Like the walls are closing in. Rover beeped suddenly, breaking the tension. Its sensors had detected movement, a faint vibration coming from further down the corridor. Rachel motioned for Stephen to follow her, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Every step echoed loudly in the confined space, amplifying their unease. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a large chamber. In the center stood several figures tall, slender creatures with translucent skin that glowed faintly in the dim light. Their limbs were elongated, and their heads tapered to sharp points. They turned to face the intruders, their movements fluid and graceful. For a moment, no one moved. Rachel and Stephen froze, staring at the beings in stunned silence. Then, without warning, one of the creatures raised a hand, pointing directly at them. A wave of energy surged through the air, and Rachel's vision blurred. When she came to, she realized she was lying on the ground, her helmet cracked and dented. Beside her, Stephen groaned, struggling to sit up. The aliens were gone, leaving behind only the faint hum of the construct's systems. "What happened?" Stephen croaked, his voice strained. Rachel shook her head, trying to clear the fog from her mind. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think they're trying to communicate." Document Part 1. The void was endless. It stretched out in every direction, swallowing light and sound alike, leaving only an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on the minds of those trapped within it. Rachel Dawson sat at her station, aboard the Aurora, staring blankly at the monitors before her. The screens displayed streams of data numbers, charts, and graphs, but none of it offered any answers to their predicament. For nearly 2 years, they had been drifting aimlessly through this uncharted region of space, far from Earth or any known colony. 2 years of isolation, rationing supplies, and clinging to hope as it slowly slipped away. Stephen Carter leaned against the doorway of the lab, arms crossed over his chest. His face was pale, marked by exhaustion and worry lines etched deeper with each passing day. He watched Rachel work, though work might have been too generous a word for what she was doing. She wasn't solving problems anymore. She was just going through motions, searching for something, anything that could explain why they were stuck here. "You're wasting your time," Stephen said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but carried a sharp edge. "We've scanned this area 100 times already. There's nothing out there." Rachel didn't look up. Her fingers moved deftly across the keyboard, inputting commands and analyzing results that never changed. "There has to be something," she replied softly. Her tone was calm, almost robotic, betraying no emotion. "If we stop looking, then we're giving up." Stephen sighed and pushed himself off the wall. He stepped closer, standing beside her chair. "Giving up? Rachel, we're dying out here. Every day we stay like this, we lose more oxygen, more power, more chances of making it back alive. Maybe it's time to accept that we're not getting rescued." She froze, her hands hovering above the keys. Slowly, she turned to face him, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of anger there, buried beneath layers of fatigue and frustration. "And do what, Stephen? Just wait until we run out of air. Until the lights go out and the temperature drops so low we freeze to death. Is that what you want?" He opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. Instead, he shook his head and looked away. Arguing wouldn't help. They both knew the truth. Their situation was dire. The Aurora had been sent on a routine mission to study a distant star system, one that scientists believed held clues about the origins of life in the universe. But something had gone wrong during the journey, a catastrophic failure in the ships. Navigation systems had thrown them off course, sending them hurtling into this desolate expanse. At first they'd tried everything to fix it. They sent distress signals, recalibrated equipment, rerouted power from non-essential systems, but nothing worked. The stars around them faded into darkness, replaced by an impenetrable blackness that seemed to swallow all attempts at communication. Days turned into weeks, which turned into months. Crew members began to lose hope. Some gave up entirely, retreating into themselves until they simply couldn't go on anymore. Now, only Rachel and Stephen remained. Rachel returned her attention to the monitor, determined to focus on the task at hand. She scrolled through pages of sensor readings, her mind racing. If she could find even the smallest anomaly glitch in the data, A faint signal it might lead them to salvation, or at least give them a reason to keep fighting. Stephen wandered over to the window, peering out into the abyss. The glass was cold against his forehead as he pressed his head against it. Outside, there was nothing. No stars, no planets, no signs of life, just emptiness. It was maddening. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the rising tide of despair. How long could they keep this up? How much longer before they joined the others who had succumbed to the void? Do you ever wonder? Rachel's voice broke through his thoughts. He glanced over his shoulder at her. She hadn't taken her eyes off the screen. Do you ever wonder if we're being punished? Stephen frowned. For what? I don't know. She shrugged slightly. Maybe for pushing too far, for thinking we could conquer space without consequences. Or maybe. She hesitated, then added quietly, maybe for forgetting how small we really are. He walked back to her side, leaning on the desk. You can't think like that. We didn't do anything wrong. This isn't some cosmic punishment. It's bad luck, that's all. Rachel nodded absently, though she didn't seem convinced. Silence fell between them again, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Then, suddenly, a beep echoed through the room. Both of them froze, turning toward the source of the noise. A single line of text appeared on the screen. Asterisk, asterisk. Anomalous signal detected. Asterisk, asterisk. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She quickly pulled up the details, her heart pounding. It was weak, barely detectable, but it was their rhythmic pulse coming from somewhere deep within the void. Not random static or interference, but something deliberate. Stephen, she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. Look at this. He leaned over her shoulder, scanning the information. What is it? I don't know yet, she admitted. But it's not natural. Someone or something is out there. Stephen straightened, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Are you sure this is a good idea? What if it's dangerous? We don't have a choice, Rachel said firmly. This could be our only chance. If we ignore it, we'll never forgive ourselves. He wanted to argue, to remind her of the risks, but he saw the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to let this go, and honestly, neither was he. As much as he hated to admit it, the thought of finding something, anything, was exhilarating. It meant they weren't completely alone. All right, he said reluctantly. Let's see where it takes us. Together, they adjusted the ship's trajectory, setting a course for the source of the signal. The Aurora groaned under the strain as its engines powered up, shaking off years of disuse. For the first time in what felt like forever, they had a destination. As they traveled deeper into the void, strange things began happening on board. Lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Gravity fluctuated, causing objects to float momentarily before crashing back down. And then there were the sounds, faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, echoing through empty corridors late at night. Neither Rachel nor Stephen mentioned these occurrences aloud. They didn't need to. Both knew the void was changing, them testing their resolve. But they pressed onward, driven by curiosity and desperation. Whatever awaited them at the end of this journey, it couldn't be worse than the endless nothingness they'd endured for so long. Hours passed, then days. Finally, the signal grew stronger, pulsing steadily in their ears. On the horizon, a shape emerged, a massive structure floating silently in the darkness. Its design was unlike anything they'd ever seen, blending organic curves with sharp, mechanical edges. Bioluminescent patterns glowed faintly across its surface, shifting and swirling like living creatures. Rachel stared at it in awe, her hands gripping the controls tightly. Beside her, Stephen swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he clutched the console. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. They both understood the significance of what they were seeing. They weren't alone anymore. Whatever this was, it represented hope and danger in equal measure, and they were about to step Into the unknown. Ready or not. Document. Part 3. Rachel groaned as she pushed herself up from the cold, metallic floor of the alien chamber. Her head throbbed, and her suit's cracked helmet felt heavier than ever. Beside her, Stephen was still struggling to regain his footing, clutching his side where the impact had knocked him down. He winced as he stood, leaning against the wall for support. What the hell was that? Stephen muttered, his voice rough and uneven through the damaged comm system. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of the creatures they'd encountered or whatever force had struck them. I don't know, Rachel replied, her tone shaky but determined. She glanced at the spot where the aliens had been standing moments before. They were gone now, leaving behind only the faint glow of the pulsating walls. But it wasn't an attack, at least. I don't think it was. Stephen frowned, clearly skeptical. You call that energy blast not an attack? Because it sure felt like one to me. It didn't hurt us, Rachel pointed out. She gestured to their surroundings. If they wanted to harm us, they could have done a lot worse. This felt different, like they were trying to send a message. A message? Stephen raised an eyebrow. What kind of message knocks you flat on your back? Rachel hesitated, unsure how to explain what she'd felt during those brief seconds when the wave of energy surged through the air. It hadn't been painful, exactly. Instead, it had been overwhelming, like a flood of emotions or images pouring into her mind all at once. She couldn't make sense of it yet, but she was certain there was meaning behind it. Maybe it was telepathic, she suggested cautiously. They might be communicating in ways we don't understand. Stephen stared at her, disbelief written plainly across his face. Telepathy? Seriously? You're telling me these things are reading our minds now? I'm just saying it's possible, Rachel shot back, her frustration rising. We're talking about beings who built this place, this living, breathing structure. Who knows what kind of technology or abilities they have? We can't assume they think or act the way we do. Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He knew better than to dismiss Rachel's theories outright. She had always been the more analytical of the two, able to see patterns and connections others missed. Still, the idea of alien mind-reading made his skin crawl. All right, he said finally. Let's say you're right. What do we do next? Sit here and wait for them to zap us again? No, Rachel said firmly. We keep moving. We need to find them. If they're willing to talk, then maybe we can figure out why we're here. And if they're not? Stephen asked grimly. What if they decide we're trespassing and decide to throw us out? Or worse? We'll deal with that if it happens, Rachel replied. She adjusted her damaged helmet, wincing slightly as the movement sent a sharp pain through her temples. But staying put isn't going to help us. If we want answers, we have to take risks. Stephen let out a long sigh, shaking his head. He didn't like this plan not one bit, but he knew arguing wouldn't change Rachel's mind. She was stubborn when she set her sights on something, and right now, her focus was entirely on uncovering the truth about the construct and its inhabitants. Reluctantly, he nodded. Fine, but if anything feels off, we're leaving. No arguments. Deal, Rachel said, offering him a small, grateful smile. She checked rover's status. It had survived the energy surge intact, though some of its sensors were temporarily offline, activating its mapping function. She instructed it to lead them deeper into the structure. The corridor ahead branched off in multiple directions, each path illuminated by the same shifting bioluminescent patterns that lined the walls. The air felt thicker here, almost suffocating, and every step echoed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Rachel kept her scanner trained ahead, searching for any signs of life or danger. Behind her, Stephen stayed close, his makeshift weapon gripped tightly in his hand. After several minutes of cautious exploration, they reached another large chamber. This one was unlike the first. It was filled with towering columns that spiraled upward, disappearing into darkness above. Glowing symbols adorned the surfaces, pulsating in sync with the rhythm of the structure itself. At the center of the room stood a platform, raised slightly off the ground and surrounded by intricate carvings. "This looks important," Rachel whispered, stepping closer to examine the platform. She ran her gloved fingers over the carvings, tracing their shapes. Some resembled the symbols they'd seen earlier, while others formed abstract designs that seemed to shift under her touch. "Careful," Stephen warned, his voice tense. "Don't touch anything unless you're sure it's safe." Rachel nodded but continued her inspection. Something about the platform drew her in, almost as if it were calling to her. She placed her palm flat against its surface, expecting resistance, but instead, warmth spread through her hand, traveling up her arm and into her chest. Her breath hitched as a sudden rush of sensations flooded her mind. Images flashed before her eyes, scenes of destruction, chaos, and despair. She saw worlds consumed by fire, skies choked with ash, and countless beings fleeing in terror. Then came glimpses of hope, survivors banding together, building new homes amidst the ruins, and creating this very structure as a sanctuary. The visions were fleeting, fragmented, but powerful enough to leave her reeling. "Rachel." Stephen's voice cut through the haze, pulling her back to reality. She stumbled backward, gasping for air as the connection broke. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor, trembling. "What happened?" Stephen demanded, kneeling beside her. His hands hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to touch her or give her space. "Are you okay?" I think so," Rachel managed, her voice barely audible. She blinked rapidly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "It showed me something. Memories, maybe. Their memories." "Whose memories?" Stephen asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "The aliens," Rachel explained haltingly. "This place sits more than just a ship or a station. It's a refuge, a last stand for whoever built it. They're running from something terrible." Before Stephen could respond, the chamber began to change. The glowing symbols brightened, casting vibrant hues across the walls and floor. The columns hummed softly, resonating with a low melodic tone that vibrated through the air. And then, slowly, the aliens returned. They emerged from the shadows, their translucent forms shimmering faintly in the dim light. There were 6 of them this time, each radiating an aura of calm, authority. They moved gracefully, surrounding the platform without making a sound. One of them stepped forward, raising a slender hand toward Rachel and Stephen. "They're trying to communicate again," Rachel said, her voice steadier now. She locked eyes with the lead alien, sensing a deliberate intent behind its actions. "I think they want us to understand." Stephen tightened his grip on the pipe, his muscles coiled like springs. "Or distract us while they figure out how to get rid of us." "Just stay calm," Rachel urged. She rose to her feet, holding her ground, despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. "Let's see what they want." The alien extended its hand further, and a beam of soft golden light connected it to Rachel. Unlike the earlier energy surge, this sensation was gentle, almost soothing. Fragments of images and emotions flowed between them, forming a rudimentary exchange of ideas. Through the link, Rachel learned that the aliens called themselves the Valeth, a species displaced by a cataclysmic event known as the Eclipse. Their homeworld had been destroyed, forcing them to flee across galaxies in search of safety. This construct, which they referred to as the Ark, served as both a vessel and a haven for their people. As the connection deepened, Rachel shared snippets of humanity's own struggles, the wars, the discoveries, the resilience that defined their species. She conveyed their plight aboard the Aurora, emphasizing their desperate need for help. The Valeth absorbed this information silently, their expressions unreadable. When the link finally dissolved, Rachel staggered slightly, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Stephen rushed to her side, steadying her with a firm hand. On her shoulder. What did they say? He asked urgently. They're refugees, Rachel replied, her voice tinged with awe. Like us, in a way. They've lost everything too. And, Stephen pressed, did they offer to help us? Rachel hesitated. Not exactly, but they understand our situation. For now, that's something. Stephen frowned, unconvinced. Understanding doesn't fill our oxygen tanks or fix our engines. We need more than sympathy. I know, Rachel said softly. She turned back to face the Valith, meeting their luminous gazes. Though they hadn't explicitly promised aid, she sensed a glimmer of hope in their presence. Perhaps, with time, they could forge an alliance, a mutual understanding that might benefit both sides. For now, however, they remained guests within the Ark, stranded between trust and uncertainty. The void outside still loomed, vast and unyielding, but for the first time in years, Rachel felt a flicker of possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with humanity and the Valith, united, however tenuously, in the shadow of shared survival. Document. Part 4. The chamber remained silent, except for the soft hum of the Ark's systems. Rachel stood frozen, her mind racing to process everything she'd just experienced. The Valith had shared their story, a tale of loss and survival, but they hadn't offered any concrete help. Still, the connection they'd formed felt significant, like a fragile thread tying two vastly different species together. She glanced at Stephen, who was pacing anxiously near the platform, his makeshift weapon still clutched tightly in his hand. This isn't enough, Stephen muttered under his breath, though his voice carried clearly through the comms system. They know we're stranded out here, and all they do is show us some glowing light show. We need fuel, supplies, a way home, not a history lesson. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples as she tried to think of how to respond. She understood his frustration. After all, they were running out of time. But she also knew that rushing or pushing too hard could ruin whatever fragile rapport they'd built with the Valith. It's not nothing, she said finally. They've opened up to Usair, their past. That's huge. Trust doesn't come easily, especially when you're dealing with strangers from another world. Stephen stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression skeptical. Trust? You think they trust us? They zapped us once already, remember? And now they're just standing there, staring like statues. For all we know, they're planning to throw us out into the void. They won't, Rachel said firmly, though even she wasn't entirely sure. Her instincts told her the Valith weren't hostile, at least, not intentionally. Their actions seemed cautious, rather than aggressive, as if they were weighing whether humanity posed a threat. We have to be patient. If we push them too fast, we might lose this chance altogether. Stephen shook his head, clearly unconvinced. Patience won't keep us alive, Rachel. Every second we waste here is another second closer to running out of air. I get it to want to believe these aliens are going to save us. But what if they don't? What's plan B? Rachel hesitated, unable to answer. The truth was, they didn't have a plan B. Not really. Returning to the Aurora without assistance meant resigning themselves to slow death in the void. Staying inside the Ark without permission risked angering the Valith, who could easily overpower them if provoked. They were caught between impossible choices, each one more dangerous than the last. Before either of them could say anything further, the Valith shifted slightly. One of them, the same individual who had initiated the telepathic link earlier, stepped forward again. Its movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as it raised both hands toward Rachel and Stephen. A faint glow emanated from its fingertips, casting golden light across the chamber. What are they doing now? Stephen whispered, his voice tense. I don't know, Rachel admitted, stepping back instinctively. She held her ground, however, unwilling to appear fearful. Whatever the Valith intended, she needed to stay calm and observe. The alien extended its hands further, and the glow intensified. This time, Instead of a surge of energy, a series of images appeared directly in their minds. Unlike the fragmented memories Rachel had received earlier, these visions were clearer, more structured. They depicted scenes of cooperation, humans and Valith working side by side, sharing resources and knowledge. There were glimpses of advanced technology being repaired, food synthesizers producing sustenance, and oxygen tanks being refilled. It was an offer, or at least, the suggestion of one. Rachel gasped softly, her eyes widening as she interpreted the message. "They're willing to help," she said, turning to Stephen. "They're showing us what they can do, if we agree to work with them." Stephen frowned, his grip on the pipe tightening. "How do we know this isn't a trick? Maybe they're luring us into something worse." "They wouldn't bother showing us all this if they wanted to hurt us," Rachel argued. "Why go through the trouble of building trust if they're just going to betray us later? Because they're smarter than us," Stephen shot back. "Maybe this is how they operate. Get us comfortable, then strike when we least expect it." Rachel clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She hated arguing with Stephen, especially when they were so close to finding a solution. But she couldn't let his fear dictate their next move. "Look, I'm not saying we should blindly trust them, but we can't afford to ignore this opportunity either. If they're offering to share resources, even temporarily, it gives us a fighting chance. Isn't that worth the risk?" Stephen stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working as he wrestled with his thoughts. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "All right," he said reluctantly, "but we stay alert. If anything feels wrong, we leave. No questions asked." "Agreed," Rachel said, relief washing over her. She turned back to the Valith and nodded, slowly, hoping they would understand her gesture as acceptance. The lead alien tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging her response. Before gesturing for them to follow, the group moved deeper into the ark, navigating corridors that seemed to shift and change around them. The walls pulsed rhythmically, guiding their path with subtle shifts in color and intensity. Rachel kept Rover close, using its sensors to map their route in case they needed to retrace their steps. Stephen stayed vigilant, scanning every shadow and corner for potential threats. Eventually, they arrived at a large, circular room filled with strange machinery. The equipment looked alien, yet functional, with panels glowing softly and mechanisms whirring quietly. In the center of the room stood several Valith technicians, their translucent forms moving gracefully as they operated the devices. One of them approached Rachel and Stephen, holding out what appeared to be a small, metallic sphere. "What is that?" Stephen asked warily, eyeing the object suspiciously. Rachel hesitated, unsure herself. She reached out cautiously, taking the sphere from the alien's grasp. As soon as her fingers touched it, the device came to life, projecting holographic displays into the air. The images showed schematics of human technology engines, life support systems, communication arrays overlaid with modifications designed to integrate with Valith components. "They're giving us upgrades," Rachel realized, aloud, her voice tinged with awe. "These designs will let us adapt our ship to use their resources." Stephen's skepticism softened slightly as he studied the projections. "So, they're helping us fix the Aurora." "It looks that way," Rachel confirmed, "but we'll need to bring parts of the ship here for repairs. It's not something we can do remotely." Stephen nodded slowly, processing the implications. "All right, let's grab what we need and get back here. The sooner we start, the better." With the Valith's guidance, they returned to the docking bay where the Aurora rested. The journey back felt surreal, as if they were walking through a dream. The Ark's organic design made it easy to lose track of direction, but Rover's mapping ensured they didn't stray too far from their path. By the time they reached the ship, both Rachel and Stephen were exhausted but focused. Inside the Aurora, they gathered essential components, damaged engine parts, faulty life support modules, and broken communication relays. Each item represented a piece of their survival, and handing them over to the Valeth felt like surrendering control. Yet Rachel reminded herself that trust worked both ways. If they wanted help, they had to give something in return. When they returned to the repair chamber, the Valeth technicians immediately set to work, using tools and techniques far beyond human understanding. They dismantled and rebuilt the components with astonishing speed. Rachel watched in amazement as the damaged parts transformed into sleek, efficient versions of themselves. Even Stephen, usually so guarded, couldn't hide his fascination. "How are they doing this?" he murmured, leaning closer to examine. "A modified engine coil. This tech is years ahead of anything we've got." "They've had centuries to perfect it," Rachel replied. "Centuries born out of necessity." As the repairs progressed, the Valeth began integrating the upgraded components into the Arcs systems, creating a temporary bridge between their technology and humanity's. Through this connection, the Aurora received a steady flow of power, oxygen, and nutrients enough to sustain them for weeks, maybe even months. For the first time since entering the void, Rachel and Stephen felt a glimmer of hope, but the reprieve came with conditions. The Valeth communicated through another telepathic link, warning Rachel and Stephen of dangers lurking beyond the Ark. Images of shadowy figures and monstrous shapes filled their minds, accompanied by feelings of dread and urgency. The message was clear. The void wasn't empty. Something else was out there, something far more dangerous than isolation or starvation. "We're safe here," Rachel said quietly, translating the Valeth's warning for Stephen. "For now, but we can't stay forever. Sooner or later, we'll have to face whatever's waiting for us." Stephen frowned, his earlier optimism fading. "Great. Just when I thought things were looking up." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We'll figure it out. Together." For the moment, though, they allowed themselves a brief respite. The Aurora hummed with renewed energy, its systems stable for the first time in years. As Rachel and Stephen sat side by side in the ship's cockpit, watching the Ark's glowing patterns reflect off the viewport, they felt a rare sense of peace. It wouldn't last, they both knew that, but for now, it was enough. Document. Part 5. The repairs to the Aurora were proceeding faster than Rachel Dawson had ever imagined possible. The Valeth worked tirelessly, their movements precise and efficient as they integrated human technology with their own advanced systems. Each component they returned was better than before, lighter, stronger, and more reliable. It was a marvel of engineering. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Stephen Carter lingered near the edge of the repair chamber, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He watched the Valeth with narrowed eyes, distrust etched into every line of his face. The aliens' glowing forms moved gracefully around him, seemingly oblivious to his unease. But Stephen wasn't fooled. He'd seen too much in his life to take anything at face value, especially when it came to beings from another world. "They're hiding something," he muttered under his breath, though his voice carried through. "The Comes system." Rachel turned to look at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What makes you say that?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. She didn't want to provoke an argument, not when things were finally starting to improve. Stephen gestured toward the Valeth technicians. "Look at them. They're too calm, too perfect. Every move they make is calculated, like they're putting on a show for us. And those warnings about the void, they're vague, almost like they're trying to scare us." Rachel hesitated, considering his words. She hadn't missed the cryptic nature of the Valeth's messages either. Their warnings about dangers lurking in the void had been unsettling, but also frustratingly unclear. Still, she couldn't ignore the progress they'd made or the fact that the Aurora was now functional again thanks to their help. "They've given us no reason to doubt them so far," Rachel said carefully. "If they wanted to harm us, they could have done it already. Instead, they've repaired our ship and shared their resources. That has to count for something." Stephen shook. his head, unconvinced. You're trusting them too easily. Just because they've helped us doesn't mean they're harmless. What if this is all part of some bigger plan? What if they're using us? For what? Rachel shot back, her frustration bubbling to the surface. We're two people stuck in the middle of nowhere. What possible use could we be to them? I don't know, Steven snapped, his voice rising. That's the problem, we don't know anything about them. We don't know why they're really helping us, or what they expect in return. All we know is that they're powerful enough to build this place and survive whatever destroyed their homeworld. Do you really think they're doing all this out of the goodness of their hearts? Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. Deep down, she knew Steven had a point. The Valith were enigmatic, their motives hidden behind layers of telepathic communication and symbolic gestures. Even the upgrades to the Aurora felt like gifts with strings attached, though she couldn't figure out what those strings might be. Before the conversation could escalate further, one of the Valith approached them. Its translucent form shimmered faintly as it extended a hand, drawing their attention. Rachel stepped forward cautiously, sensing urgency in its posture. The alien projected a series of images directly into her mind. Bypassing language entirely, she saw flashes of movement, sleek and angular, cutting through the void. They were unlike anything humanity had ever built, yet unmistakably hostile. Weapons fired, energy beams slicing through space. Explosions lit up the darkness, followed by screams and chaos. Then came a single, overwhelming image, a massive vessel, bristling with armaments, emerging from the shadows like a predator stalking its prey. Rachel staggered backward, overwhelmed by the intensity of the vision. Steven rushed to her side, steadying her with a firm grip on her shoulder. What did they show you? He demanded, his voice sharp with concern. They're coming, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. Something's heading this way, something big. The Valith are afraid of it. Steven's expression darkened. Afraid? You mean these aliens, who can zap us with their minds and fix our ship in minutes, are scared of whoever's out there? Rachel nodded, still trying to process what she'd seen. They warned us earlier, but I didn't understand. Now it's clear they've been preparing for this. That's why they're helping us. They need allies. Or cannon fodder, Steven muttered bitterly. Maybe they're setting us up to fight their battles for them. We don't have time to argue about this, Rachel said firmly, her tone regaining strength. Whatever's coming, it's dangerous. If the Valith are afraid of it, then we should be too. We need to decide what we're going to do on fast. Steven clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He hated the idea of relying on the Valith, but he couldn't deny the reality of their situation. Without the Ark's resources, they'd already be dead. Fighting alongside the aliens might be their only chance of survival. Fine, he said, finally, his voice low. But we stick together. No splitting up, no taking unnecessary risks. If things go south, we leave. No matter what. Agreed, Rachel said, relief washing over her. She turned back to the Vey fight.